On April 7th, regulatory officials from across the EU and the UK made statements that unusual blood clots with low blood platelets should be added as a very rare side effect to the AstraZeneca vaccine. I'm going to give you the details about what we know about this so far, but first, 3 really important things to note. 1, their conclusion is that the AstraZeneca vaccine has and will continue to save many, many lives from COVID, and it should still be used, especially in those at higher risk for severe outcomes from COVID infection, perhaps due to age, and in those at higher risk of COVID exposure. It is certain that many more people would have died had we not been using this vaccine. Second, the reason for this conclusion is because the goal of any new medicine is to improve outcomes compared to the current standard. It's not that we're not taking this potential severe side effect seriously or that we're dismissing the experiences of these people just because it's so rare. On the contrary, the fact that we're highlighting this is to honor those experiences and the complications people have had, to learn more about it, to let people recognize it earlier so that it can be treated and taken care of. We also honor the many millions of people who have suffered complications from COVID infection and even lost their lives due to COVID infection by taking the time to have a more nuanced conversation and really balance out those risks. And third, sometimes medical terms just sound scary. As someone with medical anxiety, I totally get that. And I'm not here to sugarcoat things, but at the same time, if you're able to stick this one out with me, I think it'll be worth it, and you'll be better able to approach this topic with facts and not fear. These very rare and unusual clots have been seen in the United Kingdom, across the European Union, and Scandinavian countries, with EU spokespeople saying it's occurring in approximately 1 in every 100,000 people vaccinated, whereas estimates out of the UK are closer to 4 in every 1 million people. In the very, very rare cases where this does occur, it's typically within 4 to 20 days following vaccination with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So far, there have been no reported cases following the second dose, and the good news is that it is treatable, especially when caught early. And this is why it's important that we're all aware about this. These are very atypical blood clots, sometimes seen in the veins in the brain called cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, the abdomen called splanchnic vein thrombosis, and arteries, together with low levels of a blood cell called platelets and sometimes bleeding. Researchers are working very hard to figure out how this may be happening and to more definitively establish a link with the vaccine. The current hypothesis for how this may be happening in these very rare cases is that antibodies produced by this particular vaccine can cause massive platelet activation, reducing overall platelet count and causing clots, also known as thrombosis. This is really different than the average type of blood clot you'd hear about, but it is quite similar to another unusual type of clotting called thrombocytopenia that can be seen in some people on the medication called heparin. In patients on heparin, approximately 200 in every 100,000 can develop heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. All that to say that there are many medications people routinely take that have much higher risks associated with them, and it feels worth it in those cases because you're already facing the disease. But when it comes to vaccines, I think sometimes our risk tolerance is a little bit lower because vaccines are something you take preventatively, so you never have to deal with the disease from infection. This is why people often say vaccines are a victim of their own success, because when they work, you don't really notice the benefits because nothing bad happened to you. Person gets vaccinated and nothing happens. It's not really a good story, even though that's the reality for millions of people getting safely vaccinated around the world. It can be hard to keep this all in perspective, but with vaccines, we have to remember to compare their potential risks to their benefits. And so far, for each of the vaccines approved where I am, in Canada, and in many places around the world, the risks are very, very minimal, but the benefits, huge. 100% efficacy in trials of preventing hospitalization and death, that's incredible. And so far, outside of trials around the world, we've been seeing pretty close to that level of effectiveness in preventing the most severe outcomes of COVID. These are the outcomes that keep us in crisis mode. If we want to get out of crisis mode, get back to the things that we miss so badly, vaccines are the way to do it. What makes the risk assessment a little bit trickier in this particular case is that the risk of blood clots following AstraZeneca vaccination seem to be a little higher in young people, whereas the risks for severe outcomes from COVID are lower in this same age group. Folks out of the UK shared these really helpful visualizations to make the risk comparison a little more tangible. I'll go through each of these slides one by one, but for each of them, in blue on the left, we're looking at the potential benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine in terms of the number of ICU admissions due to COVID that are prevented by this vaccine every 16 weeks. And on the right in orange, we're looking at the potential harms due to these rare clotting events. The first case we're going to look at is in the context of a low exposure risk to COVID. If they're under 30 in this low exposure risk scenario, their risk of complications from COVID that would send them to the ICU is quite low, and so the protection from ICU admissions from the AstraZeneca vaccine is more balanced in this age group with the potential harms due to clots. In this case, someone in that age category may want to opt for a different vaccine if it's available. Although if that is you, I do want to mention that this is just looking at the risk of ending up in the ICU, and there are other long-term challenges associated with both mild and severe COVID, including long COVID or past. For those over the age of 30, the risk of ending up in the ICU due to COVID infection is higher, so the protection from the AstraZeneca vaccine outweighs the low risk of clotting. And as soon as your risk of COVID exposure is medium to high, the benefits of getting the AstraZeneca vaccine far outweigh the risks, no matter your age. So according to these stats, which again were based off the COVID incidents in March in the UK, if you work a frontline job or you don't have a really tight-knit bubble, maybe because of your living situation, the risk of ending up in the ICU from COVID infection is much greater than the risk of these clotting complications from the AstraZeneca vaccine, which are very rare. There is still a lot we don't know about this. For example, we don't know if certain people are more susceptible than others, and that's in part because it is so rare, there haven't been enough people for us to start to pick out those patterns. So far, it seemed to be affecting people under the age of 55 more and slightly more women, and that's why guidance in Canada recently changed to only make the AstraZeneca vaccine available to those under the age of 55. But it's also unclear if that's just a result of how it was being rolled out in Europe. So as we learn more, the guidance will change accordingly. And I think we've seen the guidance changing quite quickly, which to me has been comforting. And more good news is that there are lots of studies and investigations ongoing to try to figure this out right away. It's not surprising that as we vaccinate many millions and millions of people around the world, some really, really rare things like this may pop up. But COVID infection has surprised us in so many more dangerous and frequent ways over the last year. In the meantime, the fact that this is being openly shared means that regulators are doing their job, they're being transparent, they're being cautious, and they're willing to intervene quickly if they have any reason to suspect a safety concern. But please, when it comes to vaccines especially, if someone is only ever sharing the negative, that is a major red flag. Our world is wonderfully complicated and nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Rare side effects should be discussed. Every individual's experience is valid and important, but if someone is only sharing those, that is a very biased view, and I promise you, if they're just sharing the negative, they do not have your best interests at heart. Every medicine and really everything in life has risks. And so far, for the vast majority, and especially during a wave or a surge, it is much more risky to not get vaccinated than it is to get vaccinated. Not to mention the tremendous benefits of being vaccinated and having some immunity against a disease. My hope is that everyone can have access to vaccinations all around the world very soon, and that everyone can feel empowered and excited about making their decision. Check out these sources to learn more, and do remember that the information presented in this video is based off emerging evidence and so is subject to change as we learn more. You can find me at science.sam on Instagram for updates. I have a whole Instagram story highlight on the AstraZeneca vaccine. A very special thank you to Dr. Menika Pai, Associate Professor in Hematology and Thromboembolism at McMaster University and Hamilton Health Sciences, for providing feedback on this script. Dr. Pai sits on the Ontario Science Table and is the lead author on their science brief summarizing emerging evidence on this situation. So do be sure to check out their website for the latest too. Thanks for watching, and happy to answer any questions.